Hi there. Today we will talk about React hooks, especially useState. In React, useState hook used in a function component to manage the React state. So here we have three keywords. One React hook, another state, another functional component. So let's understand these three keywords one by one. First of all, React has two types of components. One is function. We can create component by function is called functional component, and another way to create component by class is called class component. If I comment out my functional component, I have to import React. So if I save my file, I can see the functional component returns the same value. In earlier, class component used to create React component and also to manage the React state. And the functional component was only used to create the React component. It do not have the ability to change the React state. That's the reason class component is called stateful component, and the functional component was called stateless component. But in React 16.8, React introduced a mechanism called React hooks. By these React hooks, we can use these React hooks only use inside a functional component, and by these React hooks we can manage React state inside functional component. This way functional component get lot more easier and lot more popular than the class component. That is the reason everybody nowadays use functional component instead of class component. So I will remove the functional component from my file, and in my entire React project I always use functional component. So now we already talked about the functional component. Let's understand the second term, that is the React hook. What is a hook? Hook is a function that has the ability to change the React state. And now again, what is the state? State is the when we create any component with the React library, it creates a separate DOM. It calls virtual DOM. And virtual DOM is lot more faster than the real DOM. That's the reason React use virtual DOM, and all the changes we want we modify in the virtual DOM, and when we need to apply our modification in the browser, we render our virtual DOM into the real DOM. And the status of the DOM is called the state. When we want to change any DOM element, that is called we are changing the React state. So to change the React state, React has some built-in hooks. One of them is the useState hooks. Let's how we can use useState hook in action. For that, let's create a button. Count. Now if I create variable, if I do not use the React state, use regular JavaScript way to increase our state value, let's see that is it possible to change the vanilla JavaScript, to use the vanilla JavaScript to change the React state. For that I need a handler button. Now if I save my file, actually it throws an error. Just ignore this error for this E. Now if I click this button, I can see that my value increases on every click, but the update value do not appears in our DOM, because in regular JavaScript way we cannot modify the virtual DOM or the React DOM. So to modify the virtual DOM, we need to use React hook called useState hook. For that, I import the useState hook on top and move my useState hook in a regular variable to see what the useState hook returns. Just remove the content from here so that it do not throw an error. If I save my file, if I click my button, I can see actually I am returning an object instead of a regular count. So let's see that what the useState returns. If I click my button, I can see the useState hook returns an array. It has two values. The first value is the same value that we applies here. This value is called the state value, and the second value is a method to modify the DOM. So JavaScript has array destructuring mechanism like to use two variable, two array item into two variables. So now if I click this button, let's see what's happened. We can see that our state value modifies or works as we expected. So React useState has to return two value. One is the state value and another is the method to modify the DOM. So we use the React method or set method in this way. Set method has another syntax like this way. This is the regular way and this is the callback argument way. So if I save my file, I can see it works exactly as the first one. So what is the difference between these two syntax? Let's see in action. Comment out this syntax and I am creating 5 function. So what I expect that when this callback function invoke, it will increase my value 1 by 1 5 times. So if I value has 10, it should appear 15. So save my file and click this button. I can see instead of updating 5 times, it updating only once. Let's comment out this syntax and 5 times create this syntax. Now if we click this button, it has 15. If I click this button, it increase 5 times as we expected from here. So why not useState this syntax working? The reason is that when useState change the state value, it actually render the React element or React DOM. We will talk about the DOM rendering lifecycle in our later tutorial. For now, let's understand the React state value why not working as it should to work. Because when this useState set method invoke, it render the DOM, and until the DOM is ready, if we trigger or if we call other state modification, that will not affect our DOM, because to work the modification, our DOM must be ready. That is the reason this syntax throw error. Only the first syntax work and others will drop, because when the first syntax works, it try to rendering our DOM and other 4 or 5 syntax try to rendering immediately after this line. That is the reason our DOM was not ready when come this line or this line or this. But when we use this syntax, what this syntax do, it will remember the last value for this syntax, and when our DOM ready, it will modify again for this syntax, and when our DOM render and ready again, it will invoke another callback. This callback argument section works as we expected. So we understand how we can use the useState hook in 2 ways. Let's remove this line. Now useState hook, it can state any value. That means we can apply number, string, or object, or even function. So if we use this syntax, that means now our state value returns an object, and that object is the count. So this time the count is not a single value, it is an object. And if I save my file and try to click this button, it will throw an error. But because we know that JSX cannot compile or cannot return object, so in this count will be object, because we applying the state value as object. So to work this, we have to use the count.name. Like if I .name, if I use this way, it will work fine, though it will not increase because this is a number and this is a string. So you got the idea, say that we can use any value inside our useState value. So now let's focus on another topic. It is called the passing our state value from parent component to child component. For that, let's create another component in our source folder. I need a value is equal to value. Now For value I need a useState, and this value will be string. So constant array, first syntax is the first is the value and second argument is the method. Now this input value need a change handler. Now I create my child component and create another input component, and let's make this input component as a child component of our app component. That means inside here I input the input component in my top. So if I save my file, I can see my changes appears here, and if I type something, it works fine. Let's add the output in our before my tag so that we can understand that what's appearing. Now if I remove this value, my value will be removing from here. This is the regular useState way it works. Now our target is passing the state value from our parent component, in this case app, to our child component into input. For that I can pass this way, count is equal to count. That means I am passing my count state value into as an argument of an inputted count attribute. So the input will have props, and the props value will appear like count. If I save my file, I can see if I click this button, this click button is inside my child component, in my parent component, this one. But input text is my child component, so I am passing state value from my parent component to my child component. Now let's make this order in reverse order. That means I need to pass input value from my child component to my parent component. So how can we do that? For that, instead of creating a function here, I move the function into my parent component. Now this parent component needs a set value useState. So I have to move this useState from here to here. Now my child component needs two things, one value and another change handler. So go to we have to pass these two value in my input component. So one is value is equal to value, and another is one's change is equal to change handler. I am giving the attribute name as similar as a click handler way, so that we do not have any confusion. So now my input element has three attributes: count, value and onChange. So let's go to my code and I have value. Value means props.value, and change, I do not has change handler anymore because I have only one change, so I have to use one change. Actually this is the props.onChange, and the value will be props.value, and I do not need state value anymore here. So if I save my file, it will work as we expect. Now we passing this value to parent component, so let's use the value in parent component. We do not use the value in parent component, so let's use in parent component. So now if I changing anything, my child component, my value is passing to my parent component, from child component to parent component. This is the real world scenario when we use form validation, or actually this is the real world scenario. So we have to understand how this works, so do not be confused. So this way I have a props, and I have props many times. So remove the props. First argument value, second argument count, and third argument onChange. Now I can remove my props from here, and from here. If save my file, it will work. So it is little bit confusing because I changed my function name is my function name is change handler, but when I maintain the syntax for my regular HTML, my input syntax is also changed. So if I need to give the same name, I have to rename this variable name. So how can we do that? We can do that. Change handler. Now I can use the change handler here. This is the same. If I type or remove anything, now that my function works. Now another thing, when we pass any value or function in our child component, we must need set some default value. For example, if I do not pass function on change handler instead of function, so let's see what happens. If I do not pass the function, I pass regular string. If I save my file, it will throw an error. If I try something, it actually block my throw error in my application. That means my application is crashed. So when we pass any value, especially a function in JavaScript or object, we must use a default value. So I have to pass a default value like this one. So if I save my file again, now my error is gone. Actually this error is coming from here because I have to pass a function. So when we creating any value or passing any value, make sure it has a default value, so that if we do not apply or pass or as expected value, that miss argument does not crash our application. So I have covered the useState, all the details. If you understand this useState behavior, you will be very comfortable with React application, because this useState hook used a lot in React application. So let's recap again. useState used to render the React state inside a functional component. We cannot use any state value, any React hook in a class component. And the useState set method has two methods, can call two ways, either in a regular way or in a functional argument way. Now, when we create any hook in React application, we have to follow two conditions. One is that React hook cannot be any next state component. That means a React hook must be always in component top, in the component top line. We cannot move this useState hook inside any bracket like a function, object, or any next state component. So this is the first rule. And the second rule is the React hooks cannot be used the JSX element. We know that this is a JSX element. It is not a HTML element. Though it looks like HTML, but it is not HTML or XML. It is the pure it is not actually pure, it is actually JSX. That means JavaScript extended method. So when we use React hook, we cannot use JSX syntax or JSX component. We must use plain JavaScript. And what is the difference between the regular function and the React hook? Actually, React hook has two types of hooks. One is the built-in hook. React has some built-in hooks, like here I have some 7 React hook here available, like useState, use effect, use layout effect, use reducer, use context. We will talk about every hook a lot more details when we need. So now we are using the useState hook, which is used to change the React state. So hook are two types. On the built-in stack, which comes with React package. So React package has built-in hooks. And another hook is the custom hook. We can use or create custom hook according to our need. So in that custom hook, or any React hook, we cannot use JSX element. So hopefully we understand how can we use useState hook and how can we pass from state value from on component like parent component to child component and child component to parent component.